We could talk about affordable housing in some iteration or another all day. Let's start with the latest with the bond issue. So it's $120 million. What is that going to do in your mind?
Sure. I mean, I think that when you see across the state of Rhode Island, 66% of the voters approved it, so overwhelming support for the creation and preservation of affordable housing in Rhode Island. There's a housing crisis, and PCF Development is one organization that's addressing the need for creating more housing in the state of Rhode Island.
And you've been neck deep in it long before affordable housing's always been a big deal, but within the last 5 years, it's really become acute, yes?
It has. I mean, I think the pandemic accelerated and highlighted the importance for quality, safe, affordable housing, and PCF Development has been creating housing for 35 years. In 1990, we were created and incorporated as a nonprofit organization serving Pawtucket and Central Falls.
And tell me how that model works. Where does your walk me through start to finish? Now I know different housing has different nuances to it, but the basic model of funding, how do you get from here to the finish?
Mm-hmm. So it starts with site control. And then we secure and leverage the necessary funding to be able to move the projects forward to construction and then occupancy. That oversimplifies what we do. On the home ownership side, we really need maybe one or two sources of a subsidy to move a project forward. But on the rental side, we might need a dozen sources to leverage from federal, state, local, private, and our own equity to finalize that capital stack and move that project forward to construction.
So there's a little bit of creativity to each one to try to get the pieces to fall into place.
Absolutely. And I think it's really understanding the sources that are out there, and they vary from year to year.
So on this bond specifically, what do you see it being able to do?
So we see it a few ways, and we have benefited in the past from previous bond approvals. It's created and preserved more housing in Pawtucket and Central Falls. So PCF Development has developed over 250 rental units and over 150 homeownership units over our 35-year history. So we have a long track record of creating affordable housing opportunities for residents in Pawtucket and Central Falls.
And the prices we were talking about before we started the interview are probably eye-popping for some people. 10 years ago, it might seem to be expensive, but the market's changed so much. So, for example, you've had a couple just that you have sold for how much?
Yes, so we recently sold 2 single-family homes for $299,000. We've sold 5 workforce condominiums for $299,000. And we are currently under construction with a new rental development with rents starting as low as rents in the $800 range.
All income driven.
Correct.
Everything in terms of qualification.
Exactly.
Let's zoom out a little bit. Affordable housing is not an issue only in Rhode Island, but across the country. And it seems now it's simple. Rents have gone up, prices have gone up. It's a lot of it's supply and demand, right?
Absolutely, yes.
And so how did we get there in terms of why are things so tight right now?
I mean, I can speak specifically in Pawtucket and Central Falls. We have a fantastic new MBTA commuter rail station, which has brought a lot of development and developers to the area. But that also means that they're not creating affordable housing, they're creating market rate housing. And when you develop market rate housing, you can pay more for acquisition of property. When you develop affordable housing, you have to be really mindful of acquisition cost and total development cost. That's part of the scoring criteria when we apply for funding, so we have to keep that in mind when developing property. So we can't buy everything that's available in Pawtucket and Central Falls as the for-profit developers can, which affects our ability to, continue to develop more and more projects. So we have to be creative. So we work a lot with off-market property, we work with state-owned property, municipal-owned property. We try to be really creative in our acquisition and creating partnerships with property owners around the 2 communities that we work in.
Is that a challenge? Pawtucket and Central Falls are so dense. There's not a lot of open lots or space or property to be able to acquire. Is that a challenge for you?
It is a challenge, and I think it just comes back to the partnerships in our longevity and track record that we've been developing housing for the last 35 years, so I'm really intentional about creating partnerships with as many property owners as we can. For example, we purchased a property from the Diocese of Providence, and we bought a former schoolhouse, and we converted that into condominiums that we sold to working families. We bought a former group home that was owned by the state of Rhode Island. We converted that to home ownership. We recently purchased a community bank. We're converting that into rental housing. So again, trying to think about adaptive reuse, and I know that's a conversation that happens a lot at the State House, as well as in communities across the state, is how we can reuse properties that are underutilized based on the current use that they had.
And in most of the examples you just cited, it goes from being tax-exempt property to putting it on the tax rolls.
Absolutely.
Correct? So it helps the communities.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, now you have first-time home buyers and homes paying full tax rate as an owner-occupant. The underutilized properties on the rental side are now on the tax rolls as well.
I think a lot of people would say, and I question this also, but I had people come to me and say, why do we need another $120 million bond when we've already invested as taxpayers through a lot of it through the ARPA funds, upwards of $250 million, and what did we get? What have we gotten for that? It seems like a lot of money, and in my mind, haven't moved the needle that much. Are we moving the needle?
We are. I mean, I think that what you're seeing is it takes patience and takes sort of this progress that's happening. You might not see it directly, but just to give you an example, our most recent low-income housing tax credit project that was funded by Rhode Island Housing, we applied for funding in 2022. We received the approval in 2023, and it took about a year to get to closing. So we broke ground in spring of 24. And right now we currently have, as part of that development, 62 new rental units that are being developed, whether it's new construction or preserved or renovated through 12 different sites around Pawtucket and Central Falls. So you're seeing it, you may not see it in that block transformation that you mentioned, but you're seeing it from block to block to block to block with scattered site, as well as transformation of, for example, 44 Central Street is a property that we're developing right now, and that's 25 new rental units in one specific building.
Would you consider that timetable you just gave me fast, slow, moderate? Where is that in your mind?
I think there's always room for improvement. I think there's ways to create more efficiency, and I think there's ways that we can get the money on the street quicker to be able to break ground and put families in homes. That's really our ultimate goal, is to go from construction to lease up or sales, if it's home ownership, as quickly as possible.
It seems like you don't have to be an economist to know that the more inventory out there, potentially the prices are going to come down.
Yes, I mean, I think the only thing is that the added sort of opening of the train station has put more of a focus on the communities that we work in, and more attractive to out-of-state residents to want to move to Pawtucket and Central Falls, which is a great thing, but we also have to be mindful of those residents who live here and want to stay here, and they should be given the opportunity as well. RIPAC
put out a report last week, I don't know if you saw it, critical of saying we need to go at this a little bit differently. We've had a chunk of money, upwards of $250 million, and we've gotten just shy of 1,600 units, and it's kind of taken a while to get here, that the $120 million could be eaten up and not that much more to show for it. Where could the state improve in terms of how this process goes, getting from A to whatever the finish is?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of ways. I mean, I think that the state can be a partner on property that they own, again, state-owned property. I think that the cities and state can be more efficient with land use regulations, and that's one of the number one barriers in creating housing, are the zoning regulations and the land use regulations that are in place. Most of the developments that we create all require some set of municipal relief. So we have to go to zoning for essentially mostly everything that we have developed over the last at least 5 years.
So that's built into that timetable we just talked about. You got to go through the process. How has Speaker Sicarchi's been very intentional the last couple of sessions in terms of getting some of this legislation through that I think, in my mind, sends a message to the communities. Look, we're serious about this. Stop getting in the way. That's
Yes.
my paraphrase. Do you read the same way?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that you've seen that in municipalities around Rhode Island, and really the goal is to create more housing. And I think that with the Speaker of the House really leading that effort, he has put a highlight on housing that's never been to this degree before. Again, PCF Development has been developing housing over 35 years, and I've been in the sector over 30 years, and it's the first time we've seen this level of interest and commitment to housing, because it's really affecting everyone.
Coming from the State House.
From the State House.
Yeah, and that must encourage you. I'm sure you've had those discussions, you and your counterparts around the state. They come to you and say, what do you need to help us, right?
Exactly. And I think one of the number one barriers are around land use and zoning sort of regulations that are in place. And again, what does that mean when I say, when we can't create because of zoning? It means there's less units being created at the end of the day. Every project we propose to build 6 units, but by right we can only do 5. So do we go for the 6? Do we move forward with the 5? How many do we propose? And I think that we see that with every project that we're working on right now is some sort of regulatory relief, which then adds time and money to the process.
Well, one of the things that I saw that raised a little bit of concern, but I think they were able to smooth it out, was to take vacant municipal buildings, could be a school, could be an office building or whatever, and then to be able to turn that into housing. How do you feel about that?
No, I mean, we support that. I mean, I think for us, the adaptive reuse is there's only so much land.
That's what I didn't have the lingo. Adaptive
Yes.
reuse, correct.
So that's what we have to do, is we have to be creative, we have to be innovative, and we have to understand that there are limited resources that are available. So we need to be able to do this at a real cost-efficient way. But it is expensive to renovate a school. We bought a former medical building right near Memorial Hospital from the city of Pawtucket, and we're converting that into 15 apartments. So again, it's a great use. It's transforming it from that vacant, abandoned medical building to now 15 new rental apartments that will be coming soon. So it's just being creative, it's innovative, and I think that's what we try to do as an organization. PCF Development is the only nonprofit registered general contractor in the state of Rhode Island. So, as there's many general contractors in Rhode Island, we are the only nonprofit registered general contractor in the state, and we employ our own construction crew who builds all of our single-family homes and two-family homes that we sell to our first-time home buyers.
And that was from the get-go when you were founded all those years ago?
No, when we merged in 2014, when the two nonprofits in Pawtucket and Central Falls merged, that's when we became PCF Development. And at the time, the nonprofit in Central Falls was the nonprofit general contractor. So again, it's a really innovative model. It means that we can keep our costs down when we build our single and two-family homes, and we sell them to first-time home buyers, so we need less resources than maybe another developer would, because we have our in-house construction crew.
So it's all under the same roof, and so they can give you pretty good estimates. I mean, I know things always increase, but your guys have done this long enough to say, this is what we think it's going to be.
Exactly. We can control the cost, we can control the schedule, we can control as much as we can. The design, everything is in-house and done internally.
Why is that model not being used more across the state?
I don't know.
Nobody's banging down your door saying, we want to see what you're doing?
I think it works well. I mean, I think it's an innovative way, and I think that as sort of competing with the for-profit developers, we have to be mindful of the limited resources out there, and one way to do that is by being our own general contractor and control our own homeownership projects.
If you could wave the magic wand in terms of the state regulation, because that's what we hear a lot of times, the pallet shelters are a whole different issue because that's aimed at unhoused people. But the larger issue is they've had a heck of a time getting these things online because of state regulation, and some would call it bureaucratic red tape. If you could wave the wand and change one or two things from a state perspective, is there anything that you would like to see done?
I mean, I would like to see a first look model where if they're state-owned property, that a nonprofit is given the opportunity to purchase it before it becomes available on the open market. I think that model works really well.
Kind of like the Black Friday sale before everybody
Yes.
needs to come in. You get to look at it on Wednesday before it goes on Friday. And why do you think that should? So the for-profit people might say, why should you be able to do that?
Because I think we're creating housing that most people aren't creating. It's affordable housing. Most people are creating market rate housing, and we're addressing the needs in the communities where, residents in Central Falls, on median income is about $47,000. So they cannot afford $2,000 rents. They can afford $1,000 rents, and no pro forma works with $1,000 rents unless you have the capital stack that we do and the experience that we have to leverage those resources that other developers don't have.
So first look is one thing. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, just continuing to push sort of the discussion around regulatory and land use barriers in sort of reducing the requirements of what's needed on more at the local level around creating sort of housing and maybe redesigning the local zoning codes. I think that could be another thing that municipalities could do, and maybe the state providing funding to develop new zoning codes and not use the ones from decades ago, because the ones from decades ago is what's creating in sort of leading that development of housing or being a barrier to it.
Are you optimistic that things are going to change, or do you think it's still a pretty heavy uphill slog to get to where we can provide more affordable housing?
I'm always optimistic. I mean, I've been doing it for 30 plus years, and for me, it's who we are. It's a passion that we have as an organization and our whole team, and I think that's really what it comes down to is having a team that's dedicated to it, both on the development side with the same architects that we work with for a number of years, the same contractors we work with for many years, really understanding what we need to do to keep the prices in line as much as we can and meeting the schedules that we're held to. And I think that for us, that's really sort of our mission, is to continue to create more housing. So yeah, I have no doubt that as we move into 2025 and our 35th anniversary, that we'll continue to be inspired by the discussion around housing and the resources available, but trying to be creative with the limited resources that are available and disappearing on a yearly basis.